All right, we got good news, Americans. We got away with our illegal occupation of Syria. Good for us. No consequences. We are invincible. Who else should we invade since that went so well? Well, just a reminder, the U.S. has been illegally occupying Syria since 2014. But now that regime change has softened things up for us, we're suddenly on friendlier terms. Washington wants to make that official. The New Arab reports that a senior U.S. delegation is set to arrive in Damascus in the coming days to sign an agreement with the Syrian government to formalize the U.S. presence, the military presence, marking a significant shift in U.S. policy. So this would be retroactive, meaning we'll just pretend it was cool that we were there all along, even though it was not. This is a textbook pivot being framed as a step towards legitimacy, but really a way to cement U.S. influence in Syria, ensuring that that we have easy access to strategic territory, trade routes, oil. Remember President Trump during his first term saying we just wanted to keep them from having the oil, keep it for ourselves. So yeah, we got away with it. All good, all good. No accountability, no reckoning, not even a slap on the wrist for the chaos, the displacement, the suffering that the United States has enacted on Syria since, well, if we're really going to, it's not just the Obama years. We got to rewind the clock all the way to the 1949 CIA-backed coup. If you, like us, are lifelong learners, then this is a great place to go to school without really going to school. You don't have to get up early like your kids and pack a lunch. You can take courses that interest you to further your own education based on what you're interested in. Now, this is self-guided, and they have more than 40 free online courses, such as the works of C.S. Lewis, the stories in the book of Genesis, the meaning of the U.S. Constitution, which is constantly debated in this country, the rise and fall of the Roman Republic. So we want to recommend that you sign up. Here's a good one. Introduction to Aristotle's Ethics, How to Lead a Good Life. So again, these are self-paced and you can start whenever and wherever. So start your free course today. Head on over to hillsdale.edu/redacted to enroll. There's no cost and it's easy to get started. One more time, that's hillsdale.edu/redacted. Former CIA agent and whistleblower John Kiriakou joins us to discuss because he has been talking about this for a long time. So up top, all good?
Yeah, way to go, John.
We got away with it.
Yeah.
Does this feel good? Should we take a victory lap?
Who else should we invade?
Winning.
I know, right?
Yeah.
We're gonna have 2,000 troops freed up. We can now invade pretty much anybody we want. I will say a couple of things have surprised me about this. First of all, have you seen it anywhere in the American media? Because I haven't, and I look for it. It was the Turks who leaked this story 5 days ago with no following statement from the Pentagon. So the Turks are the ones that are saying, hey, you know, the Americans are engaged in discussions with the new Syrian government. Those discussions are taking place in Ankara. And what it looks like is going to happen is that the U.S. is going to withdraw, except for one small base, which we may keep just one person on. One person, just to say that there is a U.S. presence in Syria, which is nuts to me. But the bottom line is what you just said.
Right, that's what I say.
Sign me up for that job.
Oh, no problems protecting yourself when you're the only American in an isolated base in southeastern Syria. So
when you have been murdering civilians from that base for a decade.
You are exactly right. You're exactly right. I was having a conversation with a friend earlier today about the illegality of sending combat troops overseas without approval from Congress. And, you know, when you think about it, this is an impeachable offense that has been committed by every single president since Harry Truman. Every single president. The last time the U.S. Congress declared war was on December the 8th, 1941, the day after the bombing of Pearl Harbor. But the Constitution is very clear. If we are going to engage in war, it has to be after a vote in Congress. And we just don't bother. You know, Congress has attempted half measures over the years. You know, they'll do authorizations for use of force. Those are just resolutions. They don't have the impact of law. They just pretend that the president is not sending troops, or they talk about approving on a budgetary basis, an appropriations basis, enough to feed and clothe and arm the troops. But that's not the same as a declaration of war. So now we're going to withdraw these combat troops from Syria. They should never have been there in the first place. But are we bringing them home? Remember, this hasn't been reported by the U.S. government. It's the Turks telling us what the Americans are doing. Are we going to send them to Somalia or to the Sahel, where we already have other combat troops? Or are they actually coming home? We don't know.
Well, what we've been seeing is that Israel is starting to step up attacks on Syria. So maybe we want to get the heck out of there. Is there an angle there and sort of let them have at it?
There very well could be. The conventional wisdom was that the Israelis and the Turks were the big winners in the fall of Bashar al-Assad. Everybody agreed that that was the case. They were the big winners. And you remember in the immediate couple of days after Assad's overthrow, the Israelis went in, they pushed in past Golan just a couple of miles. And everybody said, oh, well, you know, they shouldn't have done that. But we understand that the Israelis probably want to have a little bit of a buffer zone. Well, listen, there's nothing in international law that says you can have a buffer zone, number one. Number two, the Israelis never said that they were going to stop there and have a buffer zone. Since then, and it's been a couple of months now, they have repeatedly bombed Syrian territory, including inside the city of Damascus. And it looks like that's going to be the Israeli policy now, that nothing is going to change with the Israelis as far as military attacks on Syria. So it could be, and forgive me if this sounds a little bit conspiratorial, but it could be that the U.S. doesn't see an upside to being in the middle between the Israelis and the new Syrian government. So it's better just to leave.
You know, Congressman Matt Gaetz, was on the floor of Congress before he left Congress, pushing to get us out of Syria. He was sort of vilified by all those neocons in Washington who wanted to continue this war. We were giving him huge rounds of applause. We're an anti-war show, and we can't stand neocons. And so pushing to get them out of Syria, bring our troops home. He was vilified for it. Of course, that didn't pass. But the argument they used, John, as you know, was that it would undermine the United States of America. It would make the United States of America less secure. That's what they told us if we brought these forces home. You saw it all over social media. Matt Gaetz, no, this will make us less secure here in the United States. How is that possible?
Right. It's an incredible, faulty analysis to me. First of all, if you want to occupy a country like Syria, and I don't know why you would want to occupy a country like Syria, you're going to need maybe 500,000 troops, not 2,000 troops. The reason why we sent 2,000 troops during the Obama administration was very simply to counter the Russian presence. We didn't have any reason to be in Syria other than to stick our thumb in the eye of the Russians. Now, the Russians, of course, had been invited into Syria by the Syrian government. Well, now the Russians are gone, and there's no reason to be in Syria anymore. And so I think that's the calculation that has been made. This had nothing to do with violence. It had nothing to do with war. It had nothing to do with terrorism. ISIS is gone from Syria. It's been gone for a long time. This had to do with saving face.
Right. Stephen Gowen's great book called Washington's Long War on Syria goes back to Bashar al-Assad's father and how the United States hated him because he was an Arab nationalist, meaning he thought that Arabs should build things for themselves. They should, because Syria doesn't have a ton of oil. They have oil, but not a ton considering when you compare it to their neighbors. But they thought that Arab money should be used for Arab prosperity. And we could not have that. And that's why we've always set our sights on imploding Syria. And what do you think of that?
I think that is exactly right. You know, we danced with Hafez al-Assad, Bashar al-Assad's father, a couple of times, and things were especially good during the Gulf War in 1990-91 because the George H.W. Bush administration convinced the Syrians to send a couple of hundred troops to Kuwait to help liberate the country. So it was all good. But you're right. Arab nationalism has always frightened the United States. And it's always frightened the Gulf Arabs because they're royalists. They're all run by royal families. And so this idea that a country like Syria could maybe join with a country like Egypt, which they did. They changed the name briefly to the United Arab Republic. They merged as one country. That just panicked the West because they were non-aligned. And in Washington, if you're non-aligned, that used to mean you're really secretly with the Soviets. And it panicked the Saudis and the Kuwaitis, the Bahrainis et al. Because they were anti-royalist. Well, now here we are all these years later, and the Saudis are finally willing to establish diplomatic relations with Syria. Why? Because the Assads are gone, and there's a former leader of ISIS and Al-Qaeda now running the country. That
so
they're
if we
comfortable with.
tick off the scariest ones, right? There was Gaddafi, there
Right.
was Saddam Hussein, and there were the Assads. We got them. Those were people who that wanted prosperity for their own nations, and we thwarted that. So
As Hillary Clinton said, we came, we saw, we
Right.
killed Gaddafi. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
the neocons are high-fiving themselves over this, and the rest of us can just feel absolutely horrid in our stomach for what we did to those civilians. That's how I feel about it. I want to puke.
John, I got to ask you, we had a Syrian journalist, friend of the show, Kevork Almasian, on the show,
Yes.
many, many times. But Kevork told us after the fall of Assad and the takeover by Jolani and all of this, and this basically CIA-backed coup that led to this whole thing. I said, do you think Syria will exist any longer? And he said, I'm sad to say I don't think Syria will exist anymore. You have the Turks to the north, you have Israel. Do you think, what does the future of Syria look like to you?
I think Syria will continue to exist, but perhaps not looking exactly the way it has always looked. The Turks are there to stay. They're going to be there forever. They talk about a buffer zone. They talk about wanting to work with the Syrian Kurds. They can't work with the Syrian Kurds. They're not able to work with any Kurds. Turkish Kurds, Iraqi Kurds, Iranian Kurds, Syrian Kurds, makes no difference. The Turks hate the Kurds. So they're going to keep this buffer zone. The Israelis apparently intend to remain as occupiers. Even if it's not a lot of territory, the Israelis are not going to leave Syria. And there still are areas of Syria where there are armed bands of Muslim fundamentalists. And so, God forbid that the Iraqis decide they need a buffer zone, for example. Then what do we do? Right. And then Lebanon is falling apart. What does it mean for the border between Lebanon and Syria? So I think Syria will continue to exist, but maybe not exactly the way it looks today.
Our guest is John Kiriakou, someone who knows this area better than just about anyone. Always appreciate your insights, John, for keeping it real.
My pleasure.
We have a comment right now that says, who cares about Syria? I mean, okay, we kill people there.
John, why should we care about Syria?
Yeah.
Because Syria is a key to stability in the greater Middle East. It's bad for everybody when governments are not viable. You mentioned Syria's oil. They have just a little bit of oil, enough for themselves, not really enough to export. But it's in America's interest for the Syrians to have a self-sustaining economy, for example, because when people are able to make a living, they don't turn to religion as an opiate. They don't. They're not easily radicalized. They don't seek to leave the country and go overseas where they could be radicalized. We need for the Syrians to be able to build an economy that keeps Syrians in Syria and everybody happy.
Right.
Thank you.
Right. Yeah. And when you had Assad there, able to control these more fundamentalist sects and be able to keep, so that you didn't have that spilling over. Yeah. I mean, then, you saw over the past 24 hours, actually the past 6 hours, John, we see head of Al-Qaeda calling for the assassination of President Trump.
That's right.
I mean, before we get you out of here, your comments on that, saying that we need to, these, I guess, Muslim radicals need to rise up and now assassinate President Trump. This is coming from the head of Al-Qaeda.
That was a very alarming report when it first came out. But you have to look at what Al-Qaeda is right now. The Al-Qaeda that he represents is is the core Al-Qaeda. It has, I'm going to go out on a limb and say, a few dozen core members. They have no access to President Trump. I think the bigger threat to U.S. interests is Al-Qaeda in the Sahel, in Africa, places like Mauritania, Mali, Niger, Burkina Faso, even parts of Ghana and Nigeria. It's exceedingly dangerous there now, and a lot of those governments are in danger of falling. That could draw the United States in. It's not a direct threat to President Trump, but in terms of a threat to President Trump, I think really that's all talk.
Someone in the chat says, why is that, Clayton? Because we effed around over there for the last 100 years. Cut the bullshit. We don't belong there. Hallelujah.
Yeah.
Yes,
And they sell us lies.
Exactly.
Like they always, they sell us lies through Syria. So we need to constantly have this exercise. And we see you. We don't believe this shit.
We don't believe it. That's right.
Yeah. All right. Thank you for this. John Kiriakou. Always a pleasure to have you.
Thanks, John.
Good to see you both.
All right.